Welcome to the Storied Motherhood Book Club. Storied Motherhood is a book club of mothers reading stories together while living out our own. Storied Motherhood is an Instagram-based book club with 3 hosts, Ashley at This Joy-Filled House, Amelia at Brave Little Learners, and Jackie over at These Slow Days. In March of 2023, our book club read was Holy Hygge by Jamie Erickson, and Jackie was able to sit down and do an Instagram live chat with Jamie, and I'm so excited for you guys to be able to watch that here on YouTube. Hi everyone, welcome to our author chat. We are so excited to have you guys on here and to listen as I get to chat with Jamie Erickson, the author of Holy Hygge, and I am just so excited to be here. So I'll give everyone a second to hop on here, and here is Jamie right now. Hi, Jamie.
Hi, you must be Jackie.
I am Jackie, yes.
It's so nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too, virtually. Thank you so much for hopping on with me and chatting about your book. We have really enjoyed it in the last month.
I'm so glad.
Yeah, it's been really great. A lot of us, I know there's been a lot of people tagging you. We usually do our review post the last Friday, so I'm sure a lot of people have been tagging you today of just how much they have loved the book and what they've thought, and yeah.
Well, I wanted to say thank you because I have been tagged numerous times this month, and your audience has been so generous and kind in their reviews, and more than anything, I'm just so grateful to God for whatever he's able to do with the words that I've written. So
totally, absolutely, that's amazing. Well, yeah, it's been really great, and I wanted you to take some time to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about yourself, and because you have a whole other book that you wrote first, so go for it.
Well, I am Jamie Erickson. I have been married to my college sweetheart for 21 years now, and he was kind of the impetus of the book because he is mostly Danish and Norwegian, kind of half and half. And we have 5 children. I was a teacher prior to having children, and when my first daughter was born, I decided I wanted to homeschool her. My husband had been homeschooled in the early 80s and 90s, and it was never, ever on my radar, but God led us to that path, and I've been homeschooling ever since. I run an online community called the Bibliophiles, which is a group of moms who get together. I help them pick out clean and captivating books for their kids. I help them vet literature for their kids. And I am the co-host of the Mom to Mom podcast with Kate Battistelli and September McCarthy, and run the Unlikely Homeschool, where that's mostly where I chat about homeschool, and that really was the impetus for my first book, which was called Homeschool Bravely.
That's awesome. You have got so many things going on, and I didn't even know about the bibliophile. Tell me the name of it again. What is it called?
Bibliophiles. A bibliophile is a person who loves literature, but I spell it Files because I send out monthly lists, book lists, to interested moms who just need some help. You know, they want their kids to read clean and captivating fiction, but it's really hard to find the time to vet literature for your kids. Right. So I help them by curating good lists for them.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, cool. I'll have to check that out for sure, and I'm sure some people watching too will also. That's amazing. Very cool. So so whenever we first started reading and first started talking about having your book in our lineup, I was looking you up, and I found the Mom to Mom podcast, and so I started listening some, and it's just been, you've provided so much encouragement, especially in the last month for me alone too. So
I'm so glad
to be talking to you. So yeah, I'm Jackie, and I have 4 boys. My oldest is 9, so we just go down from there, and yeah, so I'm just
my last 4 are boys, and they're the last at home, so it's my final 4, and I'm sure that your house is full of all kinds of energy.
Yes.
and you have a large grocery bill.
Yes, for sure, and it's just going up. It's just going up. This past month, I was I'm gonna go to Costco 1 time this month, and so I tried my best to plan out every single meal every single like snack, and we still like missed the mark. So I'll get there eventually. But yes, it's very much energetic for sure. So, but yeah, so I had never really studied Hygge or anything like that. And this was my first experience with that and reading about it at all, really. Like I've heard it tossed around online, but your perspective on it was just so amazing and encouraging. And so one of the questions that someone asked was, how long have you been practicing since you got married, or how long has that been going on for you?
Yeah, well, I did not grow up in a Christian home. My mother was a believer, my father wasn't. Mm-hmm. And so it was a bit of a disconnect with our faith. And when I met my husband, you know, I said he had been homeschooled for most of his formative years, grew up in a Christian home. Mm-hmm. And I could tell that there was something really different and compelling about his household. And I assumed that it was Jesus, which I would argue it really was. But the other piece to that was that this was a Scandinavian home, mm-hmm. and they had cocooned themselves in Hygge for all of his years, and certainly from generation to generation. And so once we got married, and you know, I moved all the way from Phoenix, Arizona to the middle of Minnesota in a teeny tiny town. Yeah. I started seeing some of the pieces of their lives that really added up to this just sanctuary lifestyle that they had. And of course, at the very center of that was Jesus. But I noticed that they put into practice some things that I had never experienced growing up. And upon more inquiry and maybe learning more and just being sort of surrounded by the Scandinavian people, I learned that, oh, it's this Hygge lifestyle. Now, if you were to talk to any of my husband's relations and friends and family, they wouldn't necessarily toss that word around. That's just ingrained in their culture. The word Hygge really has only come to America probably in the last 5 or 6 years. Not that the lifestyle wasn't here and present before, right. But the word gave them a name to attach to the lifestyle they were already living.
Totally. Yeah. I love that. That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, it's such a beautiful, it's a beautiful way to live. And so I'm sure coming into his family and just experiencing that coming from your side of the family was such a huge blessing. And also something might have been a little bit intimidating, you know? Do you feel like it was intimidating at all to kind of come into that strong family culture of Hygge? And do you feel how long did it take you to kind of really start practicing getting into it? Did it take a few years to just remember to live that way?
So if you've read the book, you know that Hygge has this, for a lack of a better way to explain it, there's this exhale, a peace when you rest well, when you surround yourself in good community, and there's this calming element, and calm and peace and sanctuary are all interwoven in Hygge. Well, I didn't grow up in a Hygge lifestyle, and so and I'd also argue I grew up in the Southwest, so personalities are different. So when I moved here and was kind of just dropped into the Scandinavian lifestyle, for about the first 3 years of our marriage, I felt like every time I entered a room, there was this silent song going on in my head. And probably a lot in your audience are too young to remember, but when I was a child watching Sesame Street, there was this one song that went like this: one of these things just doesn't belong here. And every room I entered in Minnesota, I felt like that was my anthem, because I was big with a loud personality, and that the Scandinavian people have been, people like to label them very stoic, very steady, but I would argue it's not stoicism in a negative way. It's just this calm, steady, quiet, reserved personality. And here I came in with jazz hands and lots of words and lots of excitement, and I wore my emotions on my sleeves. Right. So it did take me about 3 or so years 3 or 4 years to begin to step into that calm myself. And I still know that I have probably a larger personality that some of my family and friends are really equipped and prepared for. But I notice it a lot when I go and visit my family or they come here. I'm reminded of like the big, loud personality that I once was. And I'm not saying I diminished my personality, but I just became very steady and calm. And I really appreciate that about my husband's family, how resolute and steady they are, even in the face of some really harsh things in their lives.
Right. Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And I love how you broke down the book into like all of these different like aspects of Hygge, and, starting out with hospitality, which I feel like is like one of the most, it's not easy necessarily, but that's like the one that I'm like, I feel like I think I'm kind of getting a grip on that one. I'm still learning how to be hospitable. And I love how you just really made that part. You talked about how providing simple meals, like for people when they come into your home, saying like it's going to be loud. I think it was in that chapter you talked about the friend you invited over who was a single professional, and you were like, my house was, it was funny. I laughed out loud. I should have written it down. But what you said was like, my house is loud. It's going to be loud, but I have a seat for you. And that was so beautiful. And so I think hospitality is a huge part of that, because I think we've kind of lost, I don't want to say we lost it, but especially since the pandemic started, I feel like it's so much less of a priority. Even just like people opening their homes, like it's just different now. So that, I know that chapter was very encouraging to me. And I'm a hospitality leader at my MOPS group. So I was like, every page, I was like highlighting. It's like, this is amazing. Like, Jesus, I love the part where you talked about, Jesus, he, basically, or God healed the world basically with a bite of food. It was what broke the world, and then it's what healed the world. And I thought that was so beautiful. And I have there's a couple of hospitality questions for you that I was gonna bring up. So what are some of your top tips for entertaining or making the effort to host when you're in a hard or tiring season? And that's from Allison, one of our book club members. So
Absolutely. Good question. I will just interject. I was the hospitality leader of my MOPS group for years and years.
Cool.
So
That's awesome.
I have a special place in my heart for that. That's
so
that's
cool.
wonderful.
Yeah.
And I would also say that hospitality is one of the easy inroads for Hygge, and in large part because it is so easy to define. Like there are some tips and tricks I can give you to be more hospitable or to make hospitality easier when it maybe doesn't come very easy to you. It's a little bit trickier to talk about comfort, consolation, contentment. There's not a lot of, check the box. I've done these things, so therefore I should be content.
Yeah.
So that is really an easy one to step into when you are wanting to cultivate or nurture a Hygge lifestyle and you're not sure where to start. Start with hospitality, because that's an easy one to define. And to your point about, we've sort of lost the art of hospitality, and the pandemic certainly made that all the more difficult. And now we lack the muscle memory even to get back into even some of those basic routines of hospitality that maybe we had and needed to get better at. We sort of lost the muscle memory, and now we have to perhaps be a little bit more intentional in our efforts to get the wheels going again. And once they come, they'll continue to come, but we just have to be the one to say, okay, I'll go first. For your question about being hospitable during a hard season, well, I can tell you in the last 6 months, my book came out in September, so just about 6 months have passed. And this has probably been, in my adult life, the hardest 6 months of my whole life. And some very acute seasons of grief. I've lost two dear family members, and just lots of things. And so I am going to be completely honest and say that this has been a season of less hospitality for me, but not necessarily less Hygge, because we have to remember there will be acute seasons of overwhelm.
Right.
And that's when the community that you've built up prior is going to hopefully surround you with the Hygge lifestyle that you need. And so you have to remember that there are seasons where you give hospitality, and there are seasons where you have to be vulnerable enough to receive it.
Yeah.
And so for the mom who is really in a tricky season, whether it's a short season like, you know, that I'm in, or a long season where you have like lots of littles and it's like raining babies at your house, it's a give and take, and you have to be willing to just say out loud, this is the season that I'm in, and be willing to welcome that season. With that, I think that there are some things that you can do. First of all, remember that hospitality doesn't mean you have to have people in your home. That's one form, one route of hospitality. But hospitality can look like, oh, I bought a package of Oreo cookies on my way home from work because I know that my neighbor, their dog just died. Mm-hmm. And so I want to just bring this little 5 loaves and 2 fish to their doorstep in love for them. You can open your patio or your porch and never ever invite anybody in your house. So therefore, you know, if it looks like Toys R Us just blew up in your living room, they never have to see it, you know?
Very true.
And then also I would say some set yourself up. I always say, today's Jamie is going to be kind to next month's Jamie. So what I mean by that is I'm going to put aside some things in my freezer. I'm going to bake an extra batch of cookies. Instead of just one, I'm going to double the batch. Instead of making 1 lasagna, I'm going to make 2, and I'll put one of them in the freezer right away. I'm going to have a couple of boxes of, you know, pre-mixed brownies on my shelf at the ready.
Right.
I'm going to have all the ingredients to my favorite dessert that on hand all the time. So that way, when an opportunity, when I have this like check in my spirit to say, oh, you need to invite them. Nothing has to hold me back. I can give an easier yes, knowing I've already greased the wheel, and made it a little bit easier for myself. And then lastly, I would just say, if you feel led to have people in your home, don't expect to always serve a meal every time. A dessert is just fine. So sometimes I don't have people over until like 7 o'clock at night because I know if I invite them any earlier, I'm going to have to serve them a meal. But at this point, I just want to have coffee and cookies out or muffins or whatever so that the conversation can take center stage and priority, and I can really love on them and not be worried about the meal that I might not have time or energy or effort to make.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I love that. Like those practical ways to like make it easier on yourself or thank yourself later on or whatever. But I think that's so beautiful because, you know, like I've started to do the same type of thing. Like I love to like give tacos. Like that's what I give. Like that's my main meal. Like if someone has, I'm bringing you a taco bar. You know, if you come over, you're probably going to have tacos. We just eat a lot of tacos. And so I've kept, you know, I just keep like, you know, canned refried beans and like canned corn and frozen chicken that I've made and like those little things that do help so much because it's like, oh, I can do this easily and it's not going to make me feel so stressed out. So I love that, the idea of like baking extra cookies and like all of that. So thank you for those practical like tips. So I hope
I can get on board with the like you have your couple of solid meals that you just, they're like easy crowd pleasers. You can practically make them with your eyes shut. And I mentioned in the book that chicken Alfredo is mine.
Oh, yeah.
And so my kids know if we're having somebody over to eat, they know what's on the menu. They don't even need to ask. In fact, we're going to a potluck tonight and I'm making chicken Alfredo. I don't have to make extra work for myself. And sometimes thinking about what to serve becomes extra mental clutter and extra work. So it's okay that you repeat the same meal every time because chances are that you're not serving it to the same people.
Absolutely. Yes, totally. And so I think this kind of like my idea was for us to kind of go through like all the chapters. I don't know that we'll make it, but relationships was next. And so I have a few notes, but I'm kind of my mind is kind of going to, I'm really good at like, I can be like, I can sign up for a meal, I can bring food, I can do food, like tell me what you need. But when it comes to really digging into getting to know people better, deeper, I'm not as good at that. And I think it's just kind of like my personality. And so I loved your idea of the questions that you listed out in the relationship chapter. That was really helpful, you know, just kind of put those in the back of my mind. And anyway, I don't really know what I'm trying to say exactly, but sometimes us who are like doers, it's harder for us to go deeper into relationships and friendships sometimes.
Yeah.
So I don't really know what I'm asking, but could you see that? Do you agree with that sometimes?
Yes, and I would say if my husband and I were standing next to each other, one thing that you would notice right away that makes everybody love my husband, I mean, he's the most lovable guy, is that he is fully present right where he's at. You have his absolute undivided attention. He's not distracted. I've never seen the man in a rush ever, like ever. In 24 years that I've known him, he's never in a hurry. He's never in a rush because he wants to look you in the eye, and you will know without a doubt you are the most important thing to him right now. And I am not that way. Out of the Mary and Martha, I would definitely be the Martha. I'm the doer. I'm the to me, love is in the details. So I want you to feel loved by, you know, what I set out and what I have planned and all of this. I have, in writing out questions and really thinking proactively about that, I have forced myself to sit with a person and really begin, you know, asking questions doesn't come naturally to me. And so it has had to be a learned skill. But in having that every day at the table, whether we have guests or not, we try to have at least one question that we're talking about around the table. It often has to do with like current events that are happening, and we want to know our kids' opinions, and that's how we disciple them towards a biblical worldview. Maybe it's just a silly question, you know, that has nothing to do with anything. It's just a topic of conversation. And through that, I can see, especially with my older teens, and my daughter just graduated 2 years ago, and then my one son will be a senior next year. So with my older teens, I can see where they actually have stepped into that so much easier because that was rooted deeply in them by the time that they were born. So like, I can't think of a person more, when I think of a person who asks good questions and really gets to the deeper level of conversation, I always think of my daughter because she's so good at it. But I know that what came from purposeful intention around the table.
Absolutely. I love that. Yes. And being around, like, I feel like I believe there's even, don't quote me, but I believe there's research showing that the time around the table with your family is some of the most important time for your kids too. So that is like a huge testament to, you know, all of us who are like still like really in the thick of it with littles and, you know, trying to just navigate, like, don't spill something, don't throw the rice, like, you know, but still taking that time to sit with them and, you know, disciple them where they're at as little kids. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, dinner time as a family, especially when you have a million little ones and it's chaos, just remember the supper time with your family is greater than the sum of its parts. Like, so today felt like it was chaos at the table, and tomorrow probably will too, but over the course of the long haul of a lifetime spent feeding and nourishing around the table will add up to great things. So don't let the one night define the rest of the story.
Totally. Oh, I love that. That's so good. I love it. And that kind of like moves into this question. What is your favorite way to introduce Hygge to your kids and to young children? This is from Tori, if Tori's watching. Hi. And that's a great way, is like around the table.
Yeah.
But what do you have to add to that?
That's an interesting question, and I think it really does lean into our idea as Americans that there has to be like a system or a program to teach something or to train something, but really Scripture talks about discipleship, and that's really the very best way to teach or model anything.
Yeah.
I could give you could go to Target and buy like a Hygge kit maybe or whatever, but Hygge is a lifestyle, and that's really lived out through modeling. And so when you're nurturing and curating spaces, Hygge spaces for your kids, by the time, as soon as they get put in your arms, when you're talking to them quietly, when you're responding in love, when you are, when you've created a home where it's like less cluttered, you've put in some good rhythms and habits in place to make less emotional clutter for them. That's the very best way to teach a child how to live a Hygge lifestyle. We don't ever actually use the word Hygge around the house. It's not like we're like, oh, this is a very Hygge moment. I think I might be cutting out. Can you hear me?
Good.
Can you see me?
You're good on this side.
My screen is frozen. You're frozen, but I'll just keep talking. So, I think the very best way to do any sort of discipleship, whether Hygge lifestyle or not, is just really through modeling and walking it out. You can't expect your kids to do anything that you yourself are not doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. That is so true. I think you're right, because we do kind of focus on like, ooh, what's this curriculum, or what do I need to help? I was just thinking about like a study for Easter this year, and like, what are these? I think you have a really good point about it being a lifestyle, of implementing a lifestyle and leading by example. So I love that. That's a great answer to go off of, for sure.
And I think if you look at the Scandinavian people, even here in America, I have up the street is a Scandinavian preschool, and it's modeled off of Danish and Norwegian concepts for raising children. I'll not go into that, but we have those kids outside every day, regardless of the temperatures. And it gets below zero around here for a long time throughout the year. But it goes back to there's no bad weather, only bad clothing. So you see these like little Stay Puft Marshmallow kids, like barely able to toddle around in their little suits outside playing. But they have they send the kids outside. They're outside with them, and they get immersed in nature. And that's another part of a Hygge lifestyle.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Yeah. I mean, I think, being outside, we live in Central Texas, so we don't really have 0-degree days ever. Like we had a few years ago, we had like a 6-degree day, and it was like freezing outside. But even here, like being outside, and that is a huge part of our homeschool and like how we are, plus the amounts of energy, like we have to go outside. It's just, we have to. So kind of, we're still talking about kids here. So I have another question, kind of like, what are some appropriate ideas that you think for practicing hospitality for a young child or a toddler? Some practical ideas for practicing hospitality.
Well, I think if I reach way back in the recesses of my mind to those early years, the 4 things that kind of stand out to me that I think we always did with our kids. One, I had my littles, as soon as they could kind of walk, so 2.5, 3 years old, they were walking and able to do jobs. Anytime we were having a guest over, it was their job to set the table. And we use glass plates, but again, if you read my book, use white plates that I've gotten at thrift shops. So if one of them breaks, we just clean it up and keep going. So they put out the napkins and the silverware, and eventually they would graduate to plates and cups. So it was their job to set the table. With that, you have to be okay as a mom that it's going to look like perhaps a toddler set the table, and that's okay. Resist the urge to come behind them and like fix and rearrange, because then you're negating all the effort and the work that they put in. And you're diminishing and dismissing the gifts that they offer to the house in that moment. So being able to set the table and prepare for the guests, almost always they help me create some sort of welcome sign. I still have the chalkboard that we've used for nearly 2 decades of parenting. when they were really little, they would tell me what they wanted me to write on the board, like, welcome, Johnson family, or we're glad you're here. It's playtime. And then they would decorate it with pictures, and we'd set it out right by the front door. If we didn't do the chalkboard, we'd do it on our driveway so that the guests would see a welcome sign coming in. And then my kids really got used to greeting the guests at the door and taking their coats. So if you can envision like a little 2-year-old playing with the coat, and then they'd go put it over here on the chair. They didn't have to hang it up. And then we often had the kids make very simple little place cards just for kind of special occasion situations where we were having guests over for, Easter dinner or Christmas dinner or whatever, to make little place cards. Maybe it was like a handprint turkey, and then I'd write the person's name on it so they could see that their effort, that, hey, your gifts matter here. You are an integral part of the hospitality that's nurtured in our house. And if there was ever any kids invited in the guest group, we'd talk about the fact that, now's your job to be the host or the hostess. Even as a toddler, we'd use, with our toddlers, we'd use words like that. Like, they're your guests. So let's think of maybe 2 or 3 special toys that you can greet them with right away so they know that they are welcome here.
I love that. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so let's see. I was reading, it was the beginning of the month, and I had a couple of friends over with little ones in one morning, and my oldest, I had like made some muffins for everyone, and my oldest just randomly started making signs. So I was like in the hospitality chapter when you were talking about something. I must have been exactly what you just said, and I was like, at first I was like, because I don't know. At first I was like, one of them said "eat me" on it, like by the study set by the muffins, and I was like, you know what? Normally, I guess I think I would take that down, but I just was reading the book, and I was like, I need to leave that up. That's great. And so I was able to tell him afterward with his little signs everywhere on the door and stuff, hey, thank you. You were very hospitable. So it was such a cool teaching moment, And so that really kind of opened my eyes to, I need to encourage them to, write notes. Of course, they do that for grandparents, but not other people usually. So it was cool to see him do that and kind of take ownership without me even saying anything. So it's cool to see them kind of take the ownership of being hospitable. But,
and then as you do that enough when they're little, then you have tweens and teens, and you stand back in just absolute gratitude and amazement when they do show such hospitality, and they're forward thinking. Like, I'm having my teen friends over for a bonfire. I need to set out all the chairs. I want to get the snacks ready. I have these conversation starters at the ready. It just becomes part and parcel of who they are and sort of the culture of your home.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. That's awesome. Well, thank you for those tips and answering that question. And I feel like I could probably stay in hospitality a lot longer. But anyway, I was going to move on to another question, which I'm actually really interested in. I'm glad that Allison, once again, she had another question that I asked earlier. But this one is a really good one. How does Hygge, I feel like I'm saying it wrong sometimes, Hygge impact the way you homeschool? Are there any principles that carry over and apply more specifically to homeschooling? So a lot of us are homeschool moms here in the book club. Not all of us, but I would love to hear kind of your thoughts on that question.
Yeah, if you homeschool, you're with your children for large swaths of time during the day, and I feel like Hygge actually partners with homeschooling so well, marries so well, because don't we all want to cultivate and nurture spaces where our kids feel welcome and invited, calmed? Certainly more learning can happen when we calm our spaces, and it's not a lot of atmospheric chaos going on. So here are just a couple suggestions. One thing that I've done for years now is I've started our homeschool day with a call to worship, and I start at the beginning of the year thinking of a song, like a popular contemporary Christian song that we kind of like, that kind of sets the tone. And instead of starting the morning going around to all the rooms saying, hey guys, come on down, it's time to start school, and kind of starting with a shout, I just find that song on my phone, and I hit play, and I just kind of wander through the house all the way to the living room where I'm going to start our day. And my kids hear that song. They know, okay, the song lasts about 2 or 3 minutes. So they don't have to necessarily drop everything. And it's not me snapping my fingers, hey, it's time to start our day. Nobody wants to start a day like that.
No.
They know that they can, do the thing one more time, or wrap it up, or, put it in a space that they can come back to. And so they have 2 or 3 minutes to get to our homeschooling space. And it sets the tone. It starts the day in a posture of worship instead of a snap or a shout.
Right.
So that's one thing. I think definitely as homeschoolers, we can fall into the mindset that more is better. Like we curate all our school spaces with like every poster imaginable and lots of hands-on projects sitting out and books everywhere. And we think that it's going to nurture an academic environment. But actually science shows us the opposite. The more cluttered your space is, the more you get mentally agitated and your learning capacity actually decreases. Yeah. So I would argue to make, to the best of your ability, make your home as minimalistic, or the learning spaces as minimalistic as you can. Not that they have to be stark and sterile looking, right, but that somebody can actually exhale while they're sitting there. Right. And so one other tip I would say, a Hygge lifestyle is very entrenched and seeped into seasonal living. Now, for some of us, that might mean, if you really like doing crafts, you can use that giftedness or that ability to plan special thematic units for the season that you're in. Oh, we're in Easter, so we're going to make hot cross buns, and we're going to do this craft and do this stained glass cross. But that's not every mom. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that you cannot embrace the seasons and really nurture and cultivate that seasonal lifestyle. I think one of the easiest ways to do that is to just cull as many seasonal books as you have on your home shelves or at the library, and just strategically put them in a basket and set them near your learning space as a welcome invitation for your kids to begin looking through picture books that kind of set the seasonal tone. Maybe memorize a poem together that has to do with the seasons. It doesn't have to be extra. It should be woven into what you're already doing. Yeah. And then lastly, I think, the Danish people, I shared about my husband. I think he's a great example of a Hygge lifestyle. They are fully present right where they're at. And so I think as homeschool moms, we can better embrace, or more easily embrace, the rabbit trails that happen in the homeschool day, to be fully present right where we're at. So if if we're reading a book about, a certain kind of mushroom that grows, and the schedule demands that next comes math, but my kids are so captivated by these mushrooms, just drop everything you're doing, go outside and hunt for mushrooms. Willing to be nimble in your homeschool day to really welcome those rabbit trails, so that you can be fully present in the learning that is happening now, not the learning you planned to happen. Right.
Yeah. Well, that's so good. Be present in the learning that is happening now. I love that. That's awesome. Thank you so much for your wisdom. Yeah. So, we have a few more questions for you, and one that kind of lines up with, I feel like, hospitality once again, is have you ever regretted inviting someone into your home?
I can honestly say I've never regretted inviting someone in, but I can, if I'm being honest, there have been a few times where I did so begrudgingly. I was tired. It was an inconvenience. I wasn't ready. I think of one specific incident that happened very recently where a woman from my church that I was just starting to get to know, who was kind of going through a really messy divorce.
Mm-hmm.
She called me at about 8 or 8:30 in the morning. She had just dropped her kids off at school and was in my neighborhood and wondered if she could come by for coffee.
Yeah.
I was still in my jammies,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't prepared. I had a lengthy list of to-dos that I had to get going on, you know,
Right.
and I really did not want to say yes, but I'm so glad that I did. I just quickly went down to the freezer, pulled out some muffins, threw them in the microwave to defrost, brushed my teeth, and like threw on a robe, and we sat, and I can't tell you, the Holy Spirit met us there in ways that had I said no, we would have missed out. I would have missed out. So I'll be honest, I don't always like jump at opportunities to host because it sometimes is very inconvenient.
Right.
You know, and lives are messy. People rarely need you at convenient times. Really? I'm always glad for having done it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I can relate to that. Like, it's always like, for me, it's like, oh, I don't have the time, or I don't feel like it, or whatever. And it, after the fact, after we've hung out, we've met up, whatever has happened, someone's come over for dinner, or, you know, whatever, it is always like, that was so good. Why, you know, and I tend to forget that. So, like, you know, come to the next time. But I feel like that's something that needs to just be practiced more, and like kind of focusing on just being present for those opportunities, and letting yourself be present in those opportunities and be joyful about it. Yeah.
And I think one of our biggest hangups is really, and I know this sounds very harsh. Please receive it with love if you're listening. I can say from my own person, my biggest hangup when it comes to giving a yes to hospitality almost always boils down to pride. You know, I think, well, my house has to be a certain way. Right. I have to serve a certain meal. I didn't have my teeth brushed. I'm in my pajamas. So then it's all about me. The posture is inward focused. But after having hosted, I'm reminded of, you know, what the point was. And I'm always glad I did it. And so I have to remember that so often my quick, immediate, knee-jerk no is often from a point of pride. And I just need to let that go and know that the person on the other end of that invitation doesn't care if my house is a mess. Right. Like this woman, she didn't care that I was in my pajamas. She didn't care that I maybe had morning breath. She just desperately needed to be encouraged by somebody during a very dark season of her life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point of getting hung up on pride. And I mean, I think that's kind of like growing up, I always was like, someone's coming over, you clean. Like, we're cleaning. The house is spotless, no dishes in the sink. And my mother, like, she's amazing, and I'm glad I learned those things from her. But at the same time, it does, for me, it is a pride thing. I'm like, we have to make sure the house is picked up and cleaned up, and I've really had to let go of a lot of that. But some of that has actually gotten better with just minimizing things. And, you know, you kind of get to that in, which chapter was it? Let's see. Atmosphere, I believe. And, you know, so just like through the years since I've had children, like I have just like, I'm dwindling down all the things because it helps so much, because picking up is way faster. It still gets dirty, still gets just as dirty. There's still, it feels like there's just as many toys, but there isn't once we put them up and be like, oh, we have minimized there, you know? So that has definitely helped. It's a, you know, to invite people in for sure. But yeah, definitely getting hung up on pride. That's a hard lesson. Yeah. So let's see. So we've talked about hospitality a lot. This is very hospitable live together. But so moving on, we've talked about some relationships, well-being, and self-care. I don't think there was any questions on self-care, but I feel like that's something that I, for a while, after my second son, I went through a period where I felt like I needed self-care. I felt like I deserved self-care. And for me, it was like, you know, I need to go by myself somewhere. I need to go do something for myself. And God really, like, he really shifted things for me, which I was going through a hard time. I was having some postnatal anxiety and stuff like that. So through, prayer and working through that, God really showed me that I think that self-care can be kind of dangerous, like for me sometimes. So I have slowly learned that I don't need to necessarily be away from my children to be able to take care of myself. And so I like how you talked about self-care. And I thought that was just good. And you said Hygge. Am I saying that right? Hygge.
Hygge.
What was that?
Hygge.
Hygge. Okay. Okay. So how self-care, like having self-care like a hobby for yourself, a Hygge hobby, and having that kind of, you're rooted in rhythms for the season and stuff like that. So can you talk a little bit more about self-care and like hobbies, and maybe even share what your hobby was this winter for your Hygge hobby?
Sure. Well, the idea of self-care, the world has painted it to be selfishness. Like exactly what you're saying. I deserve this. I demand that I have my time. And really that is the opposite of self-care that Jesus demonstrated. His self-care was more in keeping with replenishing self so that he was fully able to do the things that God had for him. All the while, he never let any of his desire to be like alone in prayer eclipse the work that God had for him. So there were times where he like left his first initial plan to be alone to go and minister to the people. And we need to hold that out. Yeah. We need to hold our self-care out with an open hand, knowing this is not something that I'm deserved or entitled to, that whatever self-care I'm able to get is just a glorious gift from the Lord. Yeah. So what I think you asked what my winter hobby was. Probably, well, I'm trying to learn to ski, downhill ski.
Awesome.
And most of that is for my husband's sake. He loves to downhill ski. My husband's optimal temperature is about like 20 degrees. When it's 20 degrees outside, he's like, this is perfect. So I learned to cross country ski several years ago, and I absolutely love it. But those are two different animals. Cross country skiing to me feels like I'm falling to my death very quickly. And if I happen to make it to the bottom of the hill and I'm still standing, hey, bonus. So I'm getting better at it. So I was really intentional to get out skiing. Yeah. Of course, the one hobby that I have had since I was a little girl, but in the wintertime I'm able to do it more often, is read. And I'm rarely ever found without a book in my hand or really close by. So a lot of reading. And then for the last few winters, I've really gotten into crocheting. And so I've made a few projects this winter.
Right. That's awesome. Very cool. So what is a book that you read this winter that you really loved or would recommend?
Probably the one that I can't stop talking about is called The Residents, and it is a book that it was written by a journalist who interviewed the residence workers of the White House, and they were giving their perspectives of working for an administration that maybe they didn't always agree with. They stick with the House, so they're hired by the Parks Service, and they stick with the House whether a new administration is coming in or not. A lot of them have been there. It's a generational job. You only get a gig at the White House if you know someone. So most of them have been there, and they're like, their great-grandfather worked at the White House. Yeah, and so they're telling the stories of being at the White House during a lot of turmoil in our country. When JFK was assassinated, what did the residence workers do when Jackie came home and now they have to flip the house for the next administration, or when the Twin Towers collapsed? And so it was just such a wonderful look at the behind the scenes heroes of the White House that you don't often think about. And they're really the ones turning the wheels, keeping it going.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. That sounds like a great book. Thanks for sharing that.
It's fabulous.
Yeah, I mean, I have like a running book list of books that I'm like always add it. I don't know if I'll ever actually get to all of them, but I always like to know what people are reading. So, let's see. So, there's so many good questions, and I'm like, we've got about 10 minutes left. So, Did you see any questions on the sheet that I sent you that you really liked and would love to answer that we haven't already answered? If not,
there were so many good ones. Somebody asked what my favorite Hygge practice was, since, sort of embracing this Hygge lifestyle, what's become a habit in our household that I personally have really enjoyed, that's really nourishing to me. And I would say that it's Sabbath rest. And of course, Sabbath rest is commanded in Scripture. It's not necessarily a Hygge practice, although rest is. But I think in stepping into this Hygge lifestyle, I've been more intentional about Sabbath rest. And so I typically rest. Now, I don't want to get legalistic about it, because Sabbath was made for us, not, us for the Sabbath. So, but my typical practice of Sabbath is that I begin my Sabbath rest just after dinner on Saturday, and I rest to just after dinner on Sunday. And for the most part, other than attending church and doing, just my daily devotions, there's nothing extra spiritual about that time. It's just I choose to be intentional about family activities. I intentionally don't do any work at that time, so that I can enjoy some things. And I'm able to put blinders on to the stack of laundry that's sitting right next to me that I could be folding, or blinders on when there's a big stack of forms that need to be filled, because I'm resting. And I know, and I have learned over the years, I've seen how that Sabbath rest, God uses that and multiplies it throughout my week, so that the laundry does get eventually folded and the forms do get filled out. But I have come to anticipate that time so much. It's so life-giving to me. And then at the end of my Sabbath rest on Sunday night, I intentionally do it from Saturday to Sunday, so that I can spend, an hour or two before I go to bed sort of prepping for the week, so that I don't get started on Monday morning feeling behind.
Yeah. I love that. I had never heard that before until I read your book, that the Sabbath, I was actually traditionally started the night before. And it makes so much sense, because sometimes I feel like if you're taking a day of rest, you wake up in the morning, you're like, hey, my day of rest. And then by the end of the night, you're starting to feel overwhelmed by the next day. And so
you feel anxious about what is to come.
Yeah. And so giving yourself time to rest, in the evening, so you have an evening to rest, and then that goes into the morning time and afternoon, and then you're ready to get ready for what's to come in the week. And I think that's really beautiful. I love that. That is a really, really awesome activity that you do then, and
when you put a little bit of intention into it, a little bit of thought, what happens is then you don't regret it through the week, because you've set yourself up to not be behind. Because I think if you don't do that, and you just sort of land into the Sabbath and you just let it happen, then you do feel behind Monday morning. As the week progresses and you're nearing Sabbath, you begin to talk yourself out of doing it, because you have felt behind all week long. So it does, Sabbath does require a little bit of work. And the Jewish people throughout, all of time have intentionally had to put some habits in place so that they can rest well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's so good. I love that. Yeah. So let's see. I'm just gonna chat with you a little bit here. I think we pretty much have gone over all of the questions, and thank you so much for your talking with us and your wisdom that you've shared. And your book was awesome. And I will say this, every time I looked at it, it just brought me joy, because it's so beautiful. The cover, whoever did your artwork, it was so beautiful just to even look at. So
I can't take any credit. I give all the credit to the amazing artists at Moody. I was overjoyed with how beautiful it turned out. And I really want to thank you and your community. It's been a joy to and an honor to have had my book selected and I was actually a part, or had been following you on Instagram before you made the announcement that my book was going to come up as a potential book, and I have enjoyed following each one of the books so far. And then, you know, when you chose Holy Hygge, it was such an honor. So thank you so much. Thank you to your generous community for being so kind with their reviews. I so appreciate it.
Oh, they're amazing, and I'm so glad. I'm so thankful for everyone who is in the community. And thank you. Totally honored. But I wanted to leave some time for you to be able to talk about maybe any future plans. I know your book just came out in September, you said, but maybe even any future book ideas, or just kind of, you know, promote yourself and like just tell us a little bit more about what you do. I know you mentioned the book list that you do, and is there an Instagram for that? So go for it and just talk to us.
Sure. Well, I am currently in the throes of writing book number 3. This was a 2-book deal. So I knew right away, even before I finished Holy Hygge, I had already started planning the next book. And I can't say a ton about it other than it is specifically for moms this time, and it is for the mom who feels overwhelmed with her life. And I think coming off of the pandemic, a lot of us have felt incredibly, like, I feel lost. I'm in overwhelm fatigue, I'll call it. Yeah. So hopefully it'll be an encouragement to moms. It doesn't come out until 2025, I think, if I have my dates right. So it'll be a while, but I am currently working on it. Yeah, and you know, you can mostly find out about upcoming projects that I'm working on by going to jamieerickson.com. That's where you'll find, you know, newly released podcast episodes and any blog posts that I write. I do travel around speaking at national conferences around the country, and I will be at Teach Them Diligently with my podcast co-host at Pigeon Forge in Tennessee coming up. I want to say that's in May, but I could be wrong. I think it's in May. So that's probably the biggest one. Yeah, if anybody's interested in the bibliophiles, it's a relatively new community. I'm getting my wheel underway. I've done book recommendations on my blog every month for the past, like, I don't know, 8 or 9 years, and so I'm just sort of trying to curate a community of women just interested in that, so that you kind of don't have to be distracted by the other things. And we have a community on Facebook where we chat about books. Moms can throw in, you know, my daughter wants to read this book, but I've not heard anything about it. Has anybody else read it? So it's a great way to vet books through the community. And then once a month, I send out a book list on the first of the month. So actually, our community members will be getting it tomorrow, of books kind of separated by age range, depending upon the age of your kids. And then quarterly, I send out a themed book list. So it's books under a certain theme. The last one was about Civil War history.
Gotcha. That's so awesome. Well, I will definitely grab that link from you here in a little bit and post it in our stories for anyone who's interested.
Thank you.
But I just want to say thank you again. And this was so fun talking to you. And I can't believe it's already March 31st. When I first messaged you, it was like the beginning of January. I was like, March 31st is forever away. And here we are. So I appreciate you and your wisdom that you've shared with all of us through your words from your book and just today. And thank you so much.
It was an honor and a privilege. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, see you later. Thank you.